We're back for day 2 of Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season. We got some interesting cards to look at today, a set of lands that I think are going to be very playable. But before we dive in, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season and beyond. So let's dive in. So first thing we got today are a couple more of our room cards. These are enchantments. And today the first one we're going to look at is Mirror Room and Fractured Realm. Mirror Room costs 2 and a blue mana. And when you unlock this door, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it's a reflection in addition to its other card types. So very powerful copy ability there for 3 mana. Normally copy is 4 or 5 mana. So I think right there that makes this a good card from the very beginning if you're playing this in a creature deck where you're going to be able to copy things. But the limitation here is obviously you're only copying one of your own creatures, and then later in the game you can unlock the second door, Fractured Realms, for 5 and 2 blue mana. If a triggered ability of a permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. And I think that's the more like, okay, if it happens, great. But the first ability here, we're on Mirror Room, where you can copy a creature, and that's any creature that you control, I think makes this definitely a card that I would see blue decks playing in Standard, because that's just a very cheap way to copy a card. Next, we've got Smoky Lounge and Misty Salon. Okay, so let's talk about Smoky Lounge first. For 2 and a red mana, you get a enchantment that's a room, and at the beginning of your first main phase, add 2 red mana. Spend this mana only to cast room spells and unlock doors. So this is a card clearly meant to be used in conjunction with other rooms. So I would expect to see additional support for that across the set. And particularly it seems like blue is going to be a color that we're going to see a lot of these in. In Misty Salon, for 3 and a blue mana, you get, when you unlock this door, create an XX blue spirit creature token with flying, where X is a number of unlocked doors among rooms you control. So you unlock this, and now you get a big payoff based on how many rooms you have unlocked. So clearly this was meant to go in a room deck. So in limited, definitely, if you've got a bunch of room cards, I think this is a nice fit in there. And we'll have to see if there's enough support for rooms for it to have Standard relevance. Next, we've got Infernal Phantom. For 3 and a red mana, you get a creature that's a spirit and is a 2/3 with Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, Infernal Phantom gets +2 until end of turn. And whenever Infernal Phantom dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So another one of those red cards where it has the death trigger of doing damage to your opponent equal to its power, which we've seen a number of over the last year in Standard. So I think from that standpoint, it has a little bit of Standard playability. Certainly in Limited, I think this will be a solid card to play, because you're going to be most likely playing a room or 2, and you're going to be playing enchantments from the set. So Limited, I think, is probably the best place for this card. I don't think, because of the 4 mana cost, it has a real place in Standard. Next, we've got Undead Sprinter, our rare for the day. For a black and a red mana, you get a zombie. That's a 2/2 with trample and haste, and you may cast Undead Sprinter from your graveyard if a non-zombie creature died this turn. If you do, Undead Sprinter enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. So I think this is, if we do have a Rakdos deck that is going to be built around haste abilities that are predominantly in red, this is a good card for that, because it gives you another hasty creature, and it gives you a creature that has recursion because you can cast it from your graveyard and make it a 3/3. So I think this, if it has a place in Standard, it's going to be in that style of deck. Next, we've got our land cycle for the set, and these are all of our dual lands, and they all come with a special ability on them where they enter tapped unless a player has 13 or less life. And I think in the current Standard, it's likely by turn 4 or 5 your opponent's going to have less than 13 life if you're playing an aggro strategy. So I think in any aggro deck, these make a lot of sense as cards that can come in, maybe as early as turn 3 untapped and then give you those 2 mana colors. And because of that, I think that they're definitely going to see standard play. It's just going to depend on what decks are going to want them. I think Rancorous Carnival, I think Peculiar Lighthouse, Bleeding Woods are probably the 3 that are most likely to see play, but we definitely could see the others because of those tribal decks from Bloomburrow that we just got. Next, we've got Patched Plaything for 2 and a white mana. You get an artifact creature, that's a toy. It's a 4/3 with double strike. And Patched Plaything enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it if you cast it from your hand. So if you've got a way to, in essence, sneak this in, it's a 4/3, otherwise it's a 2/1. So if you don't have a way to sneak it in, I don't really see it as very standard playable. But if you can sneak it onto the battlefield through a reanimation ability or something like that, then a 4/3 with double strike looks really good in standard. Next, we've got Glimmer Seeker for 2 and a white mana. You get a Human Survivor. That's a 3/3, and it has survival. And at the beginning of your second main phase, if Glimmer Seeker is tapped, draw a card if you control a Glimmer creature. If you don't control a Glimmer creature, create a 1/1 white Glimmer enchantment creature token. So Glimmer Seeker, I think, is a card that does have potential in standard, particularly if we have a deck built around the survival ability. And it is a human, and we already do have a decent human deck in standard right now. So I think between one of those two kinds of style of deck, this is a potentially playable card. Next, we've got Unwilling Vessel for 2 and a blue mana. You get a Human Wizard. That's a 3/2 with Vigilance. It has Eerie, and whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, put a possession counter on Unwilling Vessel. When an Unwilling Vessel dies, create a XX blue spirit creature token with flying, where X is a number of counters on Unwilling Vessel. So 3/2 for 3 normally isn't that playable in standard given the power creep that we're seeing, but the fact that it's going to leave behind a body if it's in an enchantment or a room deck, I think that's good enough for it to see some standard play if we have a dedicated deck to those types. Next, we've got a couple more of our Fear cards from the set. First is Fear of Failed Test for 4 and a blue mana. You get an enchantment creature. That's a nightmare. That's a 2/7. And whenever Fear of Failed Test deals combat damage to a player, draw that many cards. So you can draw up to 2 cards with this if you can't increase its power any. So I think that in and of itself makes it playable in limited, because that potential for card draw is really something that I think deck builders will want in a limited format. Outside of that, probably not seeing much standard play because of the 5 mana cost. Next, we've got Fear of Isolation for 1 and a blue mana. You get an enchantment creature. That's a nightmare. That's a 2/3. And as an additional cost to cast this spell, return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, and it has flying. So if you've got a permanent you can return with this, or you're building your deck with the idea that I'm going to be returning permanents, I think Fear of Isolation is a solid card in that deck. We already have an Orzhov deck in standard that does this. So if they want to maybe stretch into Esper to include a card like this, I could see that having some standard playability. All right, well, that's it for today's spoilers from Duskmourn. Not a lot, but some good lands that I think are going to see play, and we're getting a better idea of the room mechanic in terms of how that's going to play out. So I think those are going to be solid cards for standard as we move through Duskmourn season and beyond. And here are my other preview videos so far from Duskmourn, so take a look at those if you haven't already to get an idea of what else we can expect from Duskmourn House of Horrors. Thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will see you next time.